to hell and back to protect them and the people in this room. But too many are now telling me that hell doesn't exist, or that hell actually wasn't that bad. The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful. My law enforcement career prepared me to cope with some of the aspects of this experience. Being an officer, you know your life is at risk whenever you walk out the door, even if you don't expect otherwise law-abiding citizens to take up arms against you. But nothing, truly nothing, has prepared me to address those elected members of our government who continue to deny the events of that day, and in doing so, betray their oath of office.
There it is. Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East, continuing our coverage of the powerful and emotional hearing that Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell never wanted you to see. It was up on Capitol Hill earlier today. We heard from officers who were on the front lines on January 6th. And while the committee wanted to keep things nonpartisan with a stated goal of just following the facts, the role that members of the GOP and the ex-president played in inciting the deadly riot, as well as their efforts to downplay and rewrite the history of the attack in the ensuing months, are impossible to avoid. You heard Officer Fanone there voicing what it feels like for them, for those who were beaten and brutalized by Trump supporters, to hear Republicans in Congress who, in an effort to protect their own political futures, have denied the horrors of that day. The Republican talking point of it was a peaceful protest or just a normal tourist visit, clearly and forcefully disproven by the 4 officers' testimonies today. Meanwhile, Republicans, other than the 2 serving on the committee, who face opposition and ridicule from their party for doing so, are now largely watching from the sidelines. It's a predicament of their own making since Kevin McCarthy made the decision to boycott the investigation, forcing his party instead to hold press conferences before and after the hearing, spinning their versions of the attack on our democracy. Now that the committee has displayed its seriousness and purpose before the American public and will continue its investigation into the deadly insurrection, Republicans will be out of the room, totally not a part of it, not able to steer the narrative. All the more significant as their own actions will come into focus and be a centerpiece of the committee's investigation. Here was Officer Daniel Hodges when he was asked what he wants this committee to pursue.
I need you guys to address if anyone in power had a role in this, if anyone in power coordinated or aided or abetted or tried to downplay, tried to prevent the investigation of this terrorist attack, because we can't do it.
And as Officer Harry Dunn concluded in a stirring plea to this committee, there's absolutely no hiding from the politics that were at play that day.
There's been a sentiment that's going around that says everybody's trying to make January 6th political. Well, it's not a secret that it was political. They literally were there to stop the steal. So when people say it shouldn't be political, it is. It was and it is. There's no getting around that. Telling the truth shouldn't be hard. Fighting on January 6th, that was hard. Showing up January 7th, that was hard. The 8th, the 9th, the 10th, all the way till today, that was hard. When the fence came down, that was hard. We lost a layer of protection that we had, and the fence came down and still nothing has changed. Everything is different, but nothing has changed. Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are being lauded as courageous heroes. And while I agree with that notion, why? Because they told the truth? Why is telling the truth hard? I guess in this America, it is. Us 4 officers, we would do January 6th all over again. We wouldn't stay home because we knew it was going to happen. We would show up. That's courageous. That's heroic. So what I ask from you all is to get to the bottom of what happened. And that includes, like, I echo the sentiments of all of the other officers sitting here. I use an analogy to describe what I want as a hitman. If a hitman is hired and he kills somebody, the hitman goes to jail. But not only does the hitman go to jail, but the person who hired them does. There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them. I want you to get to the bottom of that. Thank you.
The search for who hired the hitman is where we start today with some of our most favorite friends. John Heilemann is here. He's host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus, which was just nominated for an Emmy. Congratulations, my friend. Also the host of the Hell and High Water podcast from The Recount. Also joining us, Frank Figluzzi, former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI and host of the Bureau podcast. And David Plouffe is here, former Obama campaign manager. Lucky for us, all three MSNBC contributors. Well, John Heilemann, who hired the hitman?
Hello, Nicole. I think we all know who hired the hitman, and I think the officers in that room today knew who hired the hitman, and that they described, bluntly and clearly where this investigation needs to go, and they know the truth of this, and it was kind of part of the power of the day. I've been doing this for 30 some odd years, and I've never seen a congressional testimony that's had more emotional impact than this. We all sort of, on some level, knew what these guys were going to say, and yet it was wrenching to sit through and to witness. And I don't often, I've never felt as humbled watching congressional testimony by anybody. I think in the time that I've been in this job, and so humbled and so grateful for these people's service, and all these men describing what they went through, and in the middle of that humility, that sense of overwhelming humility, watching this, I was struck on the other side of that with this incredibly powerful sense of just what kind of moral depravity you must be in the grips of to engage in the kind of whitewashing and memory holing and attempted gaslighting that we've seen on the part of so many Republicans, not just the former president of the United States, but so many in that party. It's not just that they're doing something that's evil and insidious and dangerous for the country. It's all of those things. But I just can't imagine what kind of a monster you would have to be to watch those men, listen to that testimony, know the truth, hear them talk about it, and then stand up and say that the things they said were not true, that it was all a day at the beach, that it was all a picnic, it was all a vacation. It was, in some Donald Trump's recent tellings, it was a moment of glory. These were people trying to do the right thing, these rioters, these mob members, these insurrectionists, these terrorists. Just the starkness of the kind of moral monstrosity that's required to take that position in the face of that kind of testimony, it does truly boggle my mind.
Yeah, I mean, look, Frank, I had the same feeling that John is articulating. I had this feeling, though, that there are few markers to how far underground we are. I used to ask, where's the bottom? Where's the bottom with the Trump presidency? We're now so far underground that we don't often get such a stark reminder of how far up the surface is. And I think what these officers, with no decipherable partisan affiliation, revealed is that the country's politics are so far gone that a terrorist attack, in the words of one of those officers, by Donald Trump supporters, in the words of all of the officers and the insurrectionists themselves, 500 of whom have been charged now with the crimes they committed that day, have been erased by the two most powerful Republicans in the country, Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy. And I wonder, watching it today, what you thought the chances are of eroding some of the calcified lies that have been bought by the ex-president's supporters with this truth bomb.
There is hope. I'm hopeful, but I have to tell you, while I pray that we're nearing the bottom, I don't think we're there yet. And you only need to look at the social media reaction reactions to some people in Congress who are now deciding to blame everything on Nancy Pelosi. This whole thing that happened on January 6th, in their words, seems to be Nancy Pelosi's fault. There's a right-wing cable TV host who is attacking those police officers today, saying they're not fit for duty. Are we at the bottom yet? Apparently not. I hope that at the bottom, when we get there, we'll find some truth, because I don't know how an American absorbs today's testimony and doesn't feel moved to two emotions at least. One, sorrow about what happened to this country on January 6th. And secondly, anger about what happened in this nation on January 6th. I don't know, of course, how an American acts out the violence that was portrayed today on January 6th to violently overthrow our government either. So you've got me there. It's a delusion and a deception that has taken hold in the minds of so many Americans that they will not even see the truth if they even bother to listen or watch today's testimony. And that, of course, is in doubt as well. One of the things that struck me, Nicole, so many things struck me today as we see all of this in one place today, but is the racial aspect of this. I know people don't want to hear this on the far right and the folks who did this terrible terrorist act, but even my law enforcement sources still tell me the tattoos, the photos of the tattoos they were taking off the people that they're arresting still today, the shirts and slogans, the social media streams and threads of these people are consistently reflecting white nationalism, hate-based violence. That's where so many of these people are coming from. That's what Officer Dunn portrayed for us today.
Well, let's stay with this, Frank. Let me show you some more of what Officer Dunn testified to that gets to something we've talked about a lot. All four of us have talked about, which is what they knew ahead of time. I mean, I've interviewed a half a dozen members of Congress who said everything from I wore running shoes because I was afraid I might need to run, to I told my spouse where my will was, to I forbade my staff from coming into the Capitol that day. There was a lot of knowledge ahead of time that this was could be very violent. But what Officer Dunn said about the insurrectionists themselves struck me as some of them were familiar faces. Watch.
Around 10:56 a.m., I received a text message from a friend forwarding a screenshot of what appeared to be the potential plan of action, very different from a peaceful demonstration. The screenshot bore the caption, January 6th, Rally Point, Lincoln Park, and said the objective was the Capitol. It said, amongst other things, that Trump has given us marching orders and to keep your guns hidden. It urged people to bring your trauma kits and gas masks, to link up early in the day in 6 to 12 man teams. It indicated there would be time to arm up. Seeing that message caused me concern. To be sure, looking back now, it seemed to foreshadow what happened later. At the time, though, we had not received any threat warnings from our chain of command. I had no independent reason to believe that violence was headed our way.
Frank, why, with all of that in the air, why wasn't he warned that violence was in the air?
Yeah, in many ways, the entire system failed those police officers and thereby failed America in terms of our security and stability that day. And I'm not content with the mere administrative responses we're getting so far, which means, it took a long time to get this in place. We're not allowed to pass this kind of intelligence around or even investigate domestically from an intelligence gathering perspective Americans who might be engaged in rhetoric. We can't separate rhetoric from planning. We can't separate aspirational from planning and execution. I'm tired of hearing that. And so one of the key witnesses for this committee has got to be Christopher Wray. From the FBI, and the standard answers that say, we did what we could. We passed a few memos around. We pressed send on a bulletin or an email from the Norfolk office, and then we just watched on TV. That does not cut it anymore. What we need in terms of answers is, where do we go from here to fix this? What rules need to change right now to allow the FBI to get out in front of this? Because we're learning all about these people, these almost 600 people that have been arrested. Why? Because the crisis has occurred, which permits them legally now to go backwards and see what they were all about. That can't happen again, and we can do it while preserving civil liberties. I'm also getting really tired of people saying, well, you know, Frank, be careful, the civil liberties. Yes, of course we have to preserve civil liberties, but don't let the concern stop us from even having the discussion. We can do it. We did it after 9/11. We can do it if we do it together. There's the rub, but we need answers about the degree to which politics played into decision-making on intelligence gathering. We need to know how the rules need to change. We need to know whether it seems like we're totally unable to see ourselves as the threat that we pose to our own country. We need answers, and I'm hopeful that this committee is going to get there.
David Plouffe, one of the remarkable things, and Yamiche Alcindor said something similar to what Heilman said. She said this was the most important hearing she's ever covered. Was the role of Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. Kinzinger became incredibly emotional, but he also took it upon himself, as someone who said he was there, not despite the fact that he's a Republican, but because he's a Republican, to knock down some of the biggest BS that Republicans have been sort of binging at the trough over. One of them was this sort of false equivalency between the racial justice protests over the summer and what happened on January 6th. Let me play that clip. We'll talk about it on the other side.
I was called on to serve during the summer riots as an Air National Guardsman. I condemn those riots and the destruction of property that resulted. But not once did I ever feel that the future of self-governance was threatened like I did on January 6th. There is a difference between breaking the law and rejecting the rule of law, between a crime, even grave crimes, and a coup. As we begin our work today, I want to call this committee's attention to the oath of office, an oath not to a party, not to an individual, but to the Constitution that represents all Americans.
David Plouffe, that was, for a stunning hours of hearing, that was, for me, one of the more stunning rebukes to right-wing disinformation and lies.
Well, it sure was, Nicole, and it's startling, sadly, to see somebody with an R after the name saying those things. But back to your previous question about the bottom, I don't think we're anywhere near it. I mean, my sense is January 6th will now become an iconic date in the modern Republican Party, a date to celebrate. I think you'll see members of Congress doing events. I think you'll see people announcing their presidential campaigns in 2023 on January 6th. And the way we escape this is, you know, you have now the people that drive, certainly social media discussion, but I would argue a lot of Republican activists and Republican primary voters, they swim in this very toxic, delusional fishbowl where COVID was a hoax, you shouldn't take vaccines, on January 6th was not a terrorist attack, Trump won the election, he's going to be restored in some miraculous act by the My Pillow guy in August. We can laugh about those things. That's what a big segment of the Republican Party believes. But if then in 2022 and 2024, despite a lot of people not agreeing with that, they're getting 50, 51% of the vote in a lot of places, they're going to get rewarded for that. So what we need is the 70 to 75% of the country who agrees that we should remain a democracy, that January 6th rivals, you know, September 11th and December 7th, 1941 in this country, that believes that pandemics are real, that believes we should protect ourselves against them. We need to align ourselves just until the democracy is safe. And then we can go back to fighting about capital gains rates and expansion of Medicare and all the things that seem quaint now. But I think at the end of the day, it was an enormously powerful day today. And I think a lot of those clips of the two Republican members of Congress and those officers will be seen across the country. But there's still going to be a big percentage of the country that'll never see it because they look into the screen every night at Fox and Sinclair and in their Facebook feeds, and they live in that little fishbowl, and nothing punctures it.
You know, John, I watched Fox to see how much of this they took. They took most of what I've played on this show over the last hour and a little bit. But there is a despair, right, to what the Republican Party is. It's a threat to our health by peddling disinformation about the vaccine. It's a threat to our democracy by still having both arms and both legs wrapped shamelessly around the ex-president. It is also now a threat to this body. And that's what became clear to me, that Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are jeopardizing their ability to perhaps continue to serve in that body by wanting to get to the truth about an attack against that body in that building. And I wonder, just sort of stepping back from our noses against the glass, if you think this day sort of shakes up the kaleidoscope at all.
I don't know the answer to that question. I will say first, I thought that the hearing was the obvious place for this investigation to start for a variety of reasons, some tactical, some strategic, and we're going to see how this all unfolds. The one question that I continue to have is why Democrats and why the organizers of the committee, why leadership did not decide to put this hearing on in prime time. I'm virtually certain that every broadcast network in America would have taken it. And if you had been able to do it, to compress it into 2 hours or maybe even 3 hours, I think the numbers would have been, and this is not the most important thing, but it's not an unimportant thing. I think the numbers would have been vast. And I do think it's the only way, as long as this thing is seen through the prism that David Plouffe's talking about, which is the MSNBC viewers watch it, they come in with their predispositions. CNN viewers have another set of predispositions. The Fox and Sinclair and OAN viewers have another set of predispositions. It just is reinforcing where everybody's coming from to begin with. And I'm not sure how many minds got changed, even by a hearing that I just described earlier as one of the most emotionally wrenching, devastating things I think the most congressional hearing I've ever seen. I don't think it's not having the maximum effect. And I really wish that this thing had been on broadcast and cable, wall to wall, in prime time tonight rather than today. And I do wonder, I think you're right, when you saw what I detected in Kinzinger and in Liz Cheney today. Adam Kinzinger, obviously incredibly emotional. Liz Cheney was able to suppress her emotions a little bit more than Adam Kinzinger was, but I think they recognize that beyond the questions of the health of the democracy, they are having a discussion right now that is about the health of this institution in which they are a part. And I think that they must, on some level, be scared for their lives. They have to be scared for their lives right now to be taking the positions they're taking. And I think that's why they are kind of on the edge of tears as they conduct and as they play the part that they have chosen, I think, courageously to play in this process.
It is an unbelievable moment to be talking about and to be covering. David Plouffe, thank you so much for being part of our coverage today. Frank and John are sticking around after the break. The Texas